Welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast, where we address the challenges and the opportunities of midlife from a uniquely Catholic perspective. This is the time, my friends, for a deeper renewal of your Christian vocation. Come and enter into the freedom of Christ that allows you to be the person you were created to be, because there's an amazing, awesome, exciting next season of life waiting for you.
Hello, welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. I'm Curtis. It's great that you are here this week. I love this episode so much. Happy Advent, my friends. We are getting ready to re-celebrate that first Christmas when God became incarnate in the world, which is so strange and shocking. Sometimes I get the impression that people think Jesus came to earth so that we could go to heaven. But actually, if you think about it, if you think about salvation history, it runs in the other direction. It's always God wanting to come and dwell in his creation with his people. God walked in the garden with Adam and Eve. God was present in the desert, in the signs during Exodus, and dwelt at the tent of meeting. He was present in the Tabernacle, and he had a presence in the temple of Jerusalem. That's the Shekinah. That's the glory of God that the book of Ezekiel describes so dramatically, coming in and with this overwhelming presence, and then tragically leaving. And for the first century Jewish people, they're waiting for the Messiah to return, and restoring the glory of God to the temple in Jerusalem was critical. And it's something they think, hey, I would notice if that happened. The Messiah can't be the Jewish Messiah if there's no restoration of the glory of God, the Shekinah, to the temple of Jerusalem. Now, the Gospel of John, the author, the writer, takes a lot of trouble to explain, well, actually, the glory of God returned with the Messiah. And you just have to know that the theme is there so you can look at it. So the writer carefully lays out a series of signs revealing the glory of God in the Messiah. For instance, at the wedding of Cana at chapter 2, verse 11 in the Gospel of John, he says, this was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory. And you can go through the Gospel of John and look for the 7 signs. So, for instance, at chapter 4, verse 54, it says, this was the second sign Jesus performed after coming from Judea to Galilee. Now, at a certain point, the writer stops saying, this is the third sign, this is the fourth sign, because they expect the reader to be catching on and looking for this, because the reader is wanting to know, well, how is it that the glory of God returned to the temple, but I missed it? Or how come that wasn't supposed to happen? But the writer explains, oh, my friends, Jesus is the new temple. He is the glory of God. It did return to him. And we are celebrating the return of the glory of God, the determination of God to come and redeem his creation so that he can dwell with us in the redeemed earth, in the new heavens that are unified in the new creation that comes at the end of time. My friend, that is straight Catholic dogma. We are going to dwell in the new heaven and earth that are united in the new creation. We're going to be part of that new creation because we're going to be new creation, our own bad little selves. Well, good little selves at that point, God willing. So we are very pleased to help you look for the signs in the Gospel of John. Ask yourself, what's the 7th sign? Why does it matter? We're going to share the answers with you, and we're very pleased to bring you our previously presented episode, Find the 7 Signs of Glory in the Gospel of John. Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Midlife Podcast. It's great to be here with you. I'm Curtis. I'm here with my fellow host, Karen.
Hi, everyone.
And it is time to continue with the Advent theme because it's still Advent.
It is still Advent. And in fact, I got a lovely email from a listener who received our Advent email And they said, thank you for the beautiful reflection about the Jewish temple as a sign of the reality of God dwelling among us. And thank you for your podcast. Come, Emmanuel, God with us.
Well, that's really nice. And we certainly appreciate the feedback.
We do.
Karen, we were talking before this episode, and why don't you just tell the listeners what you were telling me? I thought it was fascinating. And there were some things you told me about in the book of John that I've never heard before, and I don't understand why I never heard them. So I think everybody needs to hear this.
Awesome. I would love to. It's been really fun to dig into the book of John. And I was thinking, I don't think I've ever studied it before. So there's a lot here that's new. New. That's another theme that will come forth.
New, like new creation?
Yes. And new temple.
New temple.
Awesome. So,
and Shekinah.
Yes. Well, last week we talked about the book of Ezekiel and how Ezekiel was given that vision of the glory of God leaving the temple of Jerusalem, and basically because of the idolatry of God's people and their failure to worship. But then there's that beautiful, beautiful ending vision of the glory of God returning to the temple. So this was like the promise of God's presence and glory returning. And this is in Isaiah 2, from the chapters 40 through 55, about God will return to Zion. And if we have the eyes to see, we'll see the glory returning in the form of the servant.
This is powerful, these scenes of the glory leaving and returning. And in Isaiah, the watchman shouting out the good news, the return, the glory, so desperately longed for by Israel.
Yes. And there were, in the first century, there were just a lot of people who believed that this was the time that the glory of the God would return.
Right. There had been a number of prophecies in the book of Daniel. Some of them were reading it. They were looking up some of the numbers. I think there's some of those 7 times 70 prophecies in there. And for whatever reason, they were looking at their present day with a lot of anticipation.
There was enormous expectation at the time. So people were watching for the glory of the Lord to return. And keep in mind, after the exile in Babylon, as the Jewish people returned, they did rebuild the temple in some form. And then here's Herod the Great doing all of these massive, luxurious renovations for obviously his own purposes. But nobody believed that the glory had returned to that temple.
It would have been obvious.
It would have been obvious to them. There would have been the signs, the wonders, right? The clouds, the fire, the glory. It would have been obvious to them. So nobody was thinking it's already returned and somehow we missed it.
Right. So there's this air of expectation.
It is. And the major theme of John's gospel is, here now, the glory of the Lord is returning. And here now are heaven and earth coming together. Here now is a space for God to dwell. And that's that beautiful John 1:14 passage. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, and we saw his glory.
The glory.
We saw his glory. And John is writing, he's writing a new temple narrative. He's writing a new creation narrative. And you see this right away in the prologue. It's like he's doing the thing that everybody tells you to do, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them the thing.
We
and
never do that.
Tell them what you told them. Okay. The thing you're supposed to do that we never do when you're telling a story or making a point.
Okay.
John knows how to do it.
John knows.
And so he says it right at the beginning. In the beginning was the Word. So he's saying right out, I'm writing a new creation story. And where in Genesis, God is culminating creation with the image of himself in human beings. There in 14, Jesus is becoming the Word made flesh and tabernacling among us. So you could also say the theme is Jesus is the new image of man, the true image of human beings.
And simultaneously, he's the temple.
And simultaneously, the new temple.
And the Shekinah.
And the very presence of God.
And he's about a new creation.
Exactly. Exactly. So what I was telling Curtis earlier was all of the ways in which John is proclaiming the glory of the Lord shining through Jesus and his inauguration of the new creation. So I'll just walk through a few of them here that I found super, super interesting.
Yeah. Let's hear it.
Okay. Right after the prologue, John talks about John the Baptist, who proclaims, I saw the Spirit resting on him.
Ding, 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 resting
I saw the
him.
Spirit resting on him. It's saying, here we're starting to see the new place where heaven and earth come together.
And as our listeners know by now, when the Spirit's resting somewhere, that means it's an inauguration. It is a ready for business. And you know something exciting is going to happen.
Something exciting will happen. And I love this part in John where early on, Jesus is encountering Nathanael. And I think Nathanael's been brought along with one of his friends to meet Jesus. And Jesus says something like, oh, I see you, a true Israelite. And I'm paraphrasing here. And Nathanael says, well, how did you know who I am? You don't know me.
Jesus says, I saw you under the fig tree.
Sure. I saw you under the fig tree. And he's like, holy cow, you must be the Son of Man.
Jesus is like, yeah, because I saw you under the fig tree.
He's like, that's why you're saying that?
And Jesus said what?
He said, well, follow me and I'll show you some amazing things. And he makes a reference to what's called Jacob's ladder. So he's referring to this part in the Old Testament where, Jacob had a little conflict with his brother Esau. He may have tried to, steal his birthright, and then Esau tries to kill him. So anyway, he's getting out of town. He's fleeing. And along the way, he encounters the Lord. And he sees this ladder from heaven to earth. And all these angels are going up and down the ladder.
Yeah, that's where he fell asleep with his head on the rock and had the dream of Jacob's ladder.
Oh,
The
yeah. I
angels
forgot that
going
part.
Ascending and descending.
Right.
And that's what Jesus references with Nathanael, right? You will see the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man.
Exactly. So what that meant in the story of Jacob, and thus what it means for Jesus, is here is a moment where heaven and earth are coming together. And God is with Jacob. God is present. And what does Jacob do? Obviously, this is way before Moses and the Tabernacle and the Jerusalem temple, but he builds an altar for worship and he calls it God's house.
Bethel,
God's house. So Jesus is saying, come along with me and you will see heaven and earth coming together and the presence of God in your midst.
and he's plainly evoking temple language there.
Exactly. And then John starts to tell us the signs that Jesus performs that reveal his glory, to the world. And for John, there are 7 signs throughout the gospel.
Now, I have to laugh because the first sign is the wedding of Cana. And I knew that. So that's Mary making Jesus pull the trigger before he's really established in a public way, his ministry. But what's making me laugh is you were explaining to me John sets forth these signs, and John is gradually revealing more and more of the glory, the Shekinah of Jesus. And so in John, the Gospel of John, we have the story of the wedding at Cana, and it says, Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory. I just didn't remember that.
The part about revealing his glory?
Well, I didn't remember that John said, oh, yeah, this was the first of his signs.
Right.
I didn't understand that there was this progression in the book of John.
Well, it's confusing because John only points out the first two signs.
Yeah, he only says this is the first sign and this is the second sign. And then the readers, the obtuse modern reader like me, is supposed to just pick up on the rest of them.
We're just supposed to figure out the other signs.
Yeah.
But here's an interesting point, and we've mentioned this before. John's reader would have had no problem picking up on there's sign 1, there's sign 2, and now they're going to pick out the other signs. And it would be clear to them, the 7 signs. So here's something I was reflecting on that passage, the wedding at Cana. I was just imagining, so at this point, really, Jesus is gathering a little community among him, but he's not well known. And I'm imagining him, going to this community wedding. It's family. It's some of these friends that he's known or he's starting to get to know. And here's this little group of people, and they're the only ones that know what's going on. It's the stewards who went to fill the containers with water, and it's the group of his followers who notice what's going on. But they're kind of in on this little secret. I'm just imagining them going, what the heck just happened?
It would be really hard to have context for that.
Right. It's just like, so hard to imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah. But evidently it means something. It would have been.
It was the first sign.
Amazing. It was the first sign. And John pulls out then 6 other signs. And it culminates with the final sign where the full
just
strength.
A second.
Okay.
So the signs include, there's the wedding at Cana. Then there's the healing of the noble's son at Capernaum. There's the paralytic that comes down through the roof. At the pool, I'm sorry. The paralytic at the pool. Then there's the loaves and fishes. There's healing the blind man, the man blind from birth.
Oh, that's a great story.
And Lazarus.
Raised from the dead.
And then finally, the last sign
is Jesus being crucified.
Now, this is one of the big paradoxes of the faith, that this is somehow a revelation of the Shekinah.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty hard. It must have been really hard for readers. I guess, surely they knew the story, but still, on its face, that's not very glory of God looking.
Well, it's totally opposite what they would have expected the return of the presence of the Lord to look like. So the expectation was, okay, we are going to rebuild this temple. The glory of God will return. All of these Romans will be kicked out. We'll finally be ruling with justice and peace in the land that God intended for us. And there's going to be true worship. And they had an idea of what that meant to them.
Now, when we're counting the signs and we're looking for the 7th sign, I think I would have picked the resurrection and not the crucifixion, the way I read the book. So why is it the 7th sign at the crucifixion?
Well, there's a couple of clues that John gives us. So first of all, there's numerous occasions in his gospel where Jesus is talking about being lifted up, being lifted up. And
when
that is
sure,
connected to this revelation and to the glory of God being revealed. So Jesus himself connects being lifted up with this final sign of the glory of God. And then you get the verse where Jesus breathes his last and he says, "It is finished. It is finished." And that's a direct connection to what God said when he was finished creating.
What? No, what?
Yeah, it is finished. Genesis chapter 2.
Are those the same words?
Yes. Yeah. So the meaning of that is new creation has been accomplished.
At the crucifixion.
At the crucifixion. Now, the resurrection is like the proof that what God said he did at the crucifixion, he really did. He really did defeat death. He really did establish new creation.
It's very profound that it is finished. That's the words of Christ. That's also the words of God at the end of it. I don't understand how I've gone my whole life without that connection being made.
It's amazing. And I'm trying to remember if I've heard it somewhere elsewhere, but I don't think I have.
So something, Karen, that really come to me out of contemplating all this is that we can approach God in a very kind of theological way with Trinitarian doctrines and atonement theories. And that's the intellectual ideals. We can have preconceived notions. We can have habits. But seeing the life of Jesus as a narrative and seeing how John places him in the whole sweep and panorama of Jewish history with the temple and the new creation, it's a different way of relating to him. And I can start to sense how I'm being swept up in that huge narrative, that ongoing narrative.
So are you saying it's like a shift from thinking about person of Jesus who's God and man in a little bit more abstract manner to being pulled into the story?
Yeah, as we see God operating and Jesus and the Holy Spirit, as we see the story, as we understand the story and all these sort of Russian doll, these interlinking pieces, it's a new way to encounter the Trinity.
Right. I'm thinking of that part in John after the resurrection on the first day, which has significant meaning, being the first day of new creation. And Jesus comes to the upper room and breathes his spirit upon the disciples. And it's just this, I was thinking of what you were just saying about being pulled into the narrative, that now Jesus is pulling his disciples into the spirit to be part of the new creation. And of course, breathing his spirit upon them is full of temple imagery.
It's full of Genesis imagery.
Yes.
He breathed on them.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So there's this imparting really of this place where heaven and earth come together, and imparting that to his followers and inviting them to also be places where heaven and earth come together.
Karen, before we leave this topic, there's the scene with Pilate where he says, Ecce homo, and this is a temple theme. Can you enlarge on that?
Oh, right. Right. Well, I think I mentioned before about John wanting to really show Jesus as this renewed and true image of the human being. And so you have that instance where here is Jesus with Pilate in this parody of kingship, right? With the crown of thorns and all of this just degrading experience. And here's Pilate saying, so ironically, here is the man. And it just pulls into focus what Jesus is doing as renewing who the human person is.
And there's a lot of layers to this. One is, of course, in Genesis, when man is created and he's installed as the image of God in the temple. So Jesus is the new image of man. But also, it's a contrast. When man is in the garden, it's, I guess they didn't have wine, but they had roses and it was good times. And Jesus there were many things in his life, his passion, that weren't present in the garden, the crown and the beatings and the crucifixion, and it's a contrast between unfallen man and the world after the fall.
Right, right. As you're saying that, it's just really striking me that part of what's being revealed is what it means for God's presence to come into the world, and for the word to come into the world and the world to reject the word. I think part of the reason it's striking to me is I'm thinking that, at some level, viscerally as Christians, we want to have a blessed life. We want a life in the world of goodness and grace and the presence of God. It can be very difficult to accept that this is part of what being a new creation in the image of God is going to entail in this world for now.
And in his life, Jesus holds all those things together: the love, the suffering, the passion, his people, his family, holding it all together.
Yes, yes.
Dwelling among us.
I've been reflecting on what it means to be a part of the new creation. And I think we'll be talking more about that in our next episode.
My friends, we'll leave you with that. We do want to let you know that we're going to have another round of the self-compassion groups. They were well received, and you can come to our website, thecatholicmidlife.com, look for the big buttons, look for the banner, click on it and get more information, or you can reach out to us. It's great to be here with you, and we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful Advent. That concludes our representation of our previously presented episode. My friends, we are indeed having another round of self-compassion groups. We're going to definitely do it for the women, for the men, not sure. But it is such a great experience to be part of a warm, spirit-filled group working on this deal-changing, this life-changing skill of self-compassion, which is so helpful for us to step into those virtues, those habits of mind that are going to help us receive the Holy Spirit and receive the gospel. So go to thecatholicmidlife.com, look for more details. Thanks for being here with us. The Catholic Midlife Podcast is for anyone that wants to receive the abundance of life that God has for each one of us. Take a moment right now to tell a friend about us.